Hello and welcome to Credible Talk. I'm Aarica Mims.
And I'm Eric Hage. This is the podcast where we talk about all things commercial real estate and more.
We do. And you know, Eric, one of the things I love about our quote podcast is the wide range of topics that we get to explore. And today I'm excited. We are going to be talking to someone who you probably know. And if you don't know his name, I promise you have seen his work. We are joined by Ron Stelmarski, an award-winning design director with Perkins Will, who was recently named to the AIA College of Fellows. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks for joining us, Ron. So Ron's architecture is notable for its living design philosophy. Ron's been a part of some really neat projects, not just here in Dallas, but also across the country. A few of the notable ones are Epic 1 and 2, which he did with KDC. It's a two-building project in Deep Ellum area. He also designed the Baylor Scott & White admin building, which is a really neat project, and he'll discuss that a little bit later, and the Richards Group building. And then additionally in Ohio, he's very proud of one of the projects that they just completed for Cover My Meds, which is now a company owned by McKesson. So, Ron, we're excited to talk about some of those projects and what spurred the inspiration for you on the design of those. But before we do that, can we discuss your background and exactly how you got into design?
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad to be here. It's nice to be able to talk with you about these different topics because I think we all gain inspiration from one another. And so being able to sort of rethink some of our work and describe it is always a value. But the way I got here, really, as a child, I sort of draw it back to some of the beginnings. We were moving out to a rural part of Ohio, northeast Ohio, and we were having our own new house built. And interestingly enough, by the Amish, they were coming, outside of, western Pennsylvania and helping construct that. So that was my first sort of beginnings of looking at architecture in maybe a more experiential way. It wasn't just utilitarian. It's very easy for us. We all grow up somewhere. We all inhabit buildings. Really just growing up in a rural environment is where I started to see, new insights as well. So when you're taken out of the city and you see things differently, and that's one thing I would say about my experience is always being pushed somewhere outside of maybe your comfort zone, gaining new experiences. So now we're in a rural environment, we're building a new home, and then photography was an important piece of growing up as well, just capturing places and spaces and atmospheres. So I at one point even converted one of our bathrooms into a dark room. So being able to start to capture the image, develop the image, and process it. So that's a word you'll hear me probably talk about a lot is not just inspiration, but process, how you get somewhere. And in fact, I thought I was going to go to college to study photography. That was one of my
Little
first
did you
pieces.
know.
Yeah, and I was looking at some schools. I think there was a school out there that had like the only all-color yearbook or something that seemed to be intriguing. But I started looking more closely. In high school, I found a mentor teaching industrial arts and drafting. And drafting is not just architecture, it's a piece of architecture. But that's where I would consider the fire sort of lit. That's when, just drawing plans of a home, understanding how to also represent buildings and ideas through, just two dimensions. We didn't have computers back then in any kind of capacity, so it was all, by hand. And I actually became nicknamed HD in class, a home draftsman, because I, for some reason, decided to take all my drawing.
So while
home.
people were going back home to do their
to be
to
kids,
do their studying and homework and
Yeah.
playing football in the backyard,
Yeah.
you were drafting.
Yeah, I was drafting. It was the reason I was drawing a lot, and I just found a new medium. I used to draw a lot just freehand, but this, the technical aspect really intrigued me, and that's why, again, the science of design, so the science of drawing, the science of photography, I find that as a backbeat. And these are things that I wouldn't say were calculated. I by no means, deliberately followed one step after the other. But when you go back in hindsight and try to, again, recollect as to why things happen, our collective memories are really what make us who we are, and that's kind of how it began.
So then you were drafting at an early age, and then you obviously studied architecture and design in college, and you progressed your career to a certain point where you eventually got to Perkins Will. Tell us about why you decided to go to Perkins Will.
Yeah, I'll try to do a quick version of that because, again, I went for 2 degrees in architecture. So I did the first degree at Cincinnati, which was a 6-year program, and that had a co-op program. I mention that because every other quarter after your second year, you would go off and do a work study program wherever you could find a job. So I bounced around the U.S., San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore, and really learned how to acclimate to context pretty quickly.
Aarica and I did a 6-year program. It was called college.
Right. It's a long one, too. It's an endurance test.
I'm sorry, I did not. I was not in college for 6 years.
Well, bad enough. I went back. I worked for 5 years at a small firm and then went back for 2 more years. So I went to Yale for a master's degree. And that was really just one more step, keeping doors open. And that's the thing you'll hear me say a lot as well. Instead of closing things down, I tend to try to open ideas up, whether it's opportunities, whether it's just the thought process. But going back to grad school, I felt it would, number one, give me just a reinvigorated attitude about the profession. It was much more theoretical in grad school. The peer group was as strong as you could find. And then lastly, I thought maybe I would teach, which I have not taught yet. So that's maybe another chapter someday. But
you teach every day at Perkins
That's
Will.
right. No, that's how I agree with you. So that's right. I'm going to stick with that one because I like to build. I like to at least design towards building, and that's a key piece. But to get to Perkins Will, so I stayed for a couple years with my wife and my newborn son in New Haven. We worked for Caesar Pelli, and then found our way back to our roots. Went back home. We felt raising our son and future sons in Chicago would be the right move. And I happened to just, by chance, be contacted by someone with Eva Maddox, who was a Cincinnati graduate. So Eva Maddox, and it's no secret now, she was being acquired by Perkins and Will. So I had a chance to think about branded environments, which is a really unique design group that we could talk about if we'd like to. But moving into Perkins and Will by way of the branding group brought together 2 different dimensions, 2 different scales. The brand group was doing a lot of interior spaces. They were doing museums. And as branding, as it sounds, we were designing the full, I would say, marketing ecosystem for clients. One story I always like to tell is that we were designing the collateral and showrooms for Maslin, the carpet company. We started designing even the boxes that the representatives would take to the A&D community, like bagel boxes and things like that. So we were designing all the the hardware and so forth. At one point, they came full circle and asked us to actually design their carpet patterns. So it just went to show that the idea of being able to design at all scales and think critically and understand the impact of design at those scales was important. And so we were in Perkins & Will for about 4 years when then I started to move back over into the architectural side, working with Ralph Johnson and team. And the project that's really paramount there is the Hayworth corporate headquarters. And I like that project a lot because number one, we started out only doing the showrooms. So those were our beta tests. Hayworth was reinventing themselves. They'd acquired some new product lines, and they wanted to go from something that wasn't just a furniture warehouse and really talk about environments. The cool thing for me was the fact that it was the first project I worked on in Dallas. From Chicago, Perkins & Will, I worked on the Dallas showroom for Hayworth downtown, and that was my, Sonny Bryans was downstairs. We were in the Republic building. That's all I really needed to know about Dallas at that time. And ultimately, we took that same, all the ideas, lessons learned, and moved it into the headquarters design. And I worked with Ralph Johnson on that. So we were doing really interesting interior design work, but the brand was influencing the project. And then the architecture was an addition renovation. And so we grafted on a piece of architecture that was one part light monitor because it drew in north light, but also created a space for them to really tailor experiences for all their users. So when you came to Hayworth, it wasn't just a one-size-fits-all. And then maybe the most interesting part of it was the gesture of this green roof that literally came from the ground plane and came up and over on top of the building. And at the time, the green movement was just starting to happen. So this was like a literal...
It was very forward-thinking.
Before LEED. It was LEED.
It was right. It's sort of, we swept everything under the carpet, so to speak. But, it became a piece of wallpaper. It became, very iconographic. So when you pulled up to that building, the building and ground became one, and you'll see a lot of that in the work I am part of now. So I was deeply inspired, still am, by Ralph Johnson and the work we were doing there, but just combining and entwining, inside and outside in a meaningful way, but again, symbolically and representationally, it's just as important. Now, we wanted cows to go up onto the rooftop. They never did that photo shoot, but they did put chairs on the roof.
Didn't surpass the weight limit of the roof. That's interesting. You talk about the roof and how it becomes like the wallpaper and it's one with the ground, because I think a lot of people, when they think of architecture and building their building, they build it and think about it from the inside out. And you look at it in a completely different way. You look at the environment and how the environment plays into the overall design of the building?
We try to stay away from the idea of the functional aspects. At times I'll use the quote, I want to stay unencumbered by facts. You want to stay as far away from the final product in an effort to say, what should this be? Yeah. To your point, what's the motivation for any project? We understand fundamentally it's going to, house a certain program. Yes, people will inhabit, and the water should be kept out.
Talk a little bit about the Baylor project, because that seems to align with exactly what you guys are both talking about.
That's totally a major one, and this building is something that was really important because it was unexpected. I also like that kind of aspiration to go somewhere unexpected. I don't have a preconception. I would say that every one of our best projects is something that resulted in a literal journey with the client, the users, to determine where we would go. So the Baylor Admin Center, just to give you a quick overview of what the project is, it's about 300,000 square feet of office space. It's got a large parking deck and then support amenity spaces. Now, this could have been a 10-story, 25,000 square foot floor plate building, on the east side of Deep Ellum. But listening to the client, thinking about the culture that they wanted to really draw together, it was a consolidation. They're bringing like between 6 and 8 different locations into one space. So we said, there's a great park space here. You've got Landry Park. We don't want to negate that idea. We also want to keep a low profile and not feel like this building is somehow sort of casting a shadow over its neighborhood. It wants to be part of the neighborhood. And then we wanted the program elements to be as really explicit as possible, make them as simple and functional. So the parking deck is simple rectangle, ultra efficient, it does its job. But with that, we wanted to lift the building off the ground and let the park space have as much influence as possible. So now the building's lifted off the ground. We were able to talk with the client to get to a point where the floor plates are 2 mega floor plates, 125,000 square feet. And if you convert that, that's like 3-acre floor plates. And so we say
3-acre floor plates.
We're talking acreage now, not square footage anymore.
Again, most developers would say that's a crime to absorb all that acreage with such a low building.
That's right. Well, there's a lot of lessons learned here. Well, the first question was we asked the client, they said they like big floor plates. We said, well, how big is big? Yeah. And they shrugged their shoulders. That was the first mistake.
As big as the site can accommodate.
They didn't know what big meant. And so really we followed the limits of the site, and that's the one thing. It's simple in some ways, but highly conceptual in the other. So if you take these 2 floor plates and lift them off the ground, we like to refer to it as like an inhabitable tree canopy, because you're only 45 feet off the ground, 45 to like 60. The great thing is the ground plane now is very generous and usable. It's not just a small porch. And we took some temperature readings. So this building is like a shadow caster. It creates this nice space beneath. It was a 98-degree day. We took our temperature equipment out there. The surface temperature underneath the shade was 83 degrees. Outside on the paving, it was 138.
Wow.
So you can fry some eggs out there. Yeah, so that's the reality. What we've done is we've taken an outdoor space and made it usable on a much longer part of the calendar. So we've done that. The other advantage experientially is that you're up in these 2 floor plates. Because it's only 2 floors, there are no like fire suppression or smoke issues relative to the separation. So we have all sorts of overlooks, stair connections. There's great clear stories. And that's one thing in any building that you sit in most often, there's never light coming from above. It's always lateral. So when you're finally into this kind of space where light comes from above, completely different spatial experience. And when you go see that building, and anyone who's experienced it, you recognize.
So you have to put shades above?
No, that's the thing. We pointed them north. The clear stories are all north facing, so it's beautiful light, and it just pours over and sort of cascades down into the spaces. You've got great views that, at one point we were standing on the second level of the upper plates, looking down through just an opening in the floor out to the train line the DART was going by. So it's really cinematic in a way as well, because it's all these snippets of the city. We point over towards the Epic 1 and 2. You can see that from the prow of the building. You see the old water tank there by the cotton gin mill. Mm-hmm. And so we really drew in the entire neighborhood because the building stretched itself out and has all these different identities. And then lastly, I would just say functionally, it sped up construction, and also mechanical systems were actually more efficient because now you're locating them directly above where they have to be, and they just, you just duct them down. Yeah. And you don't have to have long runs that are like inefficient. So there's a lot of practical reasons for the project, but experientially, it's really, I would say, unmatched in a lot of our work. And we titled it the Ground Scraper. That's been something. Probably not it just describes it, so instead of tilting it up, it just goes horizontal.
I would say that Ron has done a really great job of showing the building with his hands, but you guys can't see him. So if you would like to see this building, which is worthwhile, you should go to our website, kdc.com, to check out this ground scraper.
I think it's really neat that Perkins Will really listens to the client to understand their needs and doesn't just design a building that is a Perkins Will building, right? It's focused totally around the client. It's exactly KDC's philosophy as a build-to-suit developer, as a custom home builder for corporate America. I think, though, that you guys really take it to the next level. You can always tell it's a Perkins Will designed building because there's so much added thought into the design, such as Epic 1 and 2 with the cantilever structure, the Richards Group building with that big imprint in the middle of the building as you drive down 75 and the Baylor. I think all of those, there's so much added thought has been put into the design of those projects.
What we try to do is make it simple and give each client its own unique identity. That's the real key there, is the sort of search for how do you represent programmatic space into something that is legible at all scales. So for example, we looked at the Texas highway records about how many cars passed the Richards Group, and it was something like, in 2012 even, it was like 350,000 cars a day. So there's like millions of cars per year.
We get a lot of calls about amenitizing our buildings to the utmost ability, bringing more green space sometimes into the building and enhancing the green space around the building and allowing for open kind of terrace areas that are sort of give you an indoor-outdoor flow to the building, where you've got terraces up the building. You've got some of those terraces are amenitized. I think that kind of parlays into a project that you guys did, which I mentioned is the Cover My Meds project. Can you talk a little bit about some of those outdoor amenities that y'all designed into the building?
Yeah, that's an interesting one as well, because this is something even the developers called a post-pandemic building designed pre-pandemic. This was all designed before there was any COVID-19, and we had already talked about trying to, really ground the building onto its site. This was a company that was very outdoors focused already. They had kayaks where they would take them into the Scioto River in Columbus on breaks and just be able to
Can't do that in Dallas.
Nope. No, in Dallas, the sky is our ocean, we like to say. But so we have a different attitude about outdoor space. But there, again, they were making a shift. They wanted to really take that ethos and make it into something even as a driver. So they asked us to do a building that was remarkable. That was the one word they used. And we said, well, okay, we're challenge accepted, and let's see what we can do with this.
Was budget of any concern?
Well, it wasn't about budget. I mean,
budget
remarkable
comes later.
No, that's
well,
great.
I think the beauty of it is that the budget really doesn't really impact us at all. Typically, good ideas are free, and as we always say, good proportion is free. So, if you can come up with a strategy that satisfies the program and the behavior of the building, the idea of luxurious materials or more cost towards other amenities, that's a client decision we talk with. But to your question about the amenities, well, the building was built intentionally in 2 phases, but they were pulled apart. And when they're pulled apart, you have this really great center space, which is this garden. And that becomes like a lung or like a true atrium, an outdoor atrium. In the truest sense of the word, from Roman times, you would walk into a home, and before you entered, there was an outdoor space open to the sky that was the atrium. This is sort of a reasserting of an atrium space. And Ohio, the nice thing is that you have seasonal variation much more dramatically than we have here. So you're going to see, the springtime, you'll have summertime, then the fall will come in with the leaves. You'll lose the leaves, you'll have snow. And the idea that this outdoor space becomes something that you can go out to in great weather, but you can look at in inclement weather, it's just as powerful. The one interesting idea in the very beginning was that you should be able to bicycle up the entire building, and they really latched onto it. I'm not sure where it happened. Maybe the lawyers got word, but we had to turn it just into outdoor balconies. They were flat spaces, but you can still do that. You can still enter and navigate both phases, every floor level from the outside before entering the building. And that was just a way of bringing everyone, towards a center.
So do you know the length of the walkways on the exterior of the building?
Well, the buildings themselves are about 250 to 300 feet long. But you're going up per floor, and so you go and you navigate one floor level, and you have a cross connection. You have a bridge. You have 2 bridges, in fact, that are enclosed and conditioned, and there's one bridge that goes on top that's exterior for when you can take it to the outside. The thing about it is you walk up there and the buildings are peeled apart and spread out to look straight towards the Columbus downtown skyline. So you're reconnected back to the city in a really meaningful way. So you're winding through this, what we call, it's really an organic building because you've got all these networks that were at play there, and that was the big piece of it. So they're still by the Scioto. There's still hike and bike trails. There's highways and train lines, and there's this really kind of gnarly, overlap of all these different networks. And we wanted to draw that into the building. So what happens is the riverbank sort of moves its way into our building. So it's a series of cascading floor plates. So whereas the Baylor Admin Center was more of a ground scraper, massive floor plates, these go from 90,000 square feet down up to 30,000 square feet as they terrace back. And so now there's a series of overlooks. You have literally a terrain inside the building, and it just provides for a whole different attitude. They have really interesting spaces inside. They call them theme rooms that we helped support, but they were really the advocate for those. So they have like a Zen room. They've got like a 1970s kind of
Could
quasi.
use a Zen room every now and then.
Yep, you could do that. they have a clubhouse. They've got sort of they call it the Keep, sort of like this Dungeons and Dragons or.
Interesting. I think that one's worthwhile at checking out too, because it is really cool and something that we definitely don't see in Dallas. But Ron, I think that everyone understands that you're very passionate about these projects, but also you have a wide range of sector expertise that goes just beyond office. You've done some really amazing community centers. You've been involved in healthcare. Do you have a favorite project outside of office?
Yeah, that's a good question. One reason I did make a move down here was seeing the opportunity and the kind of work that was going on in Texas. I mean, this is a laboratory as far as I'm concerned. And so being able to embrace all those market types you just mentioned is a big piece of our work that influences the next project. I would say one of the favorite projects most recently is the Singing Hills Rec Center. And that's largely because it's modest. It's another project where we talk about scale not being an issue and not about luxurious materials. It's like a 20,000 square foot rec center, but it's clipped on directly to the blue line, the dark blue line, which is our public transit line. And so being able to start to connect these different kinds of infrastructures, we call the building a piece of social infrastructure because clearly a community center or a rec center is where people come together, and there's a senior center. But then at the same time, now you've got a train line that takes you into the city and gives a whole different range of experience. And it was also a building that was placed on a hillside that has direct sight lines into the skyline of Dallas. But it's sort of almost a reprieve for people who go down there. You would not expect a building to be sort of nested in this kind of environment, and all of a sudden it's really a intersection of so many great things.
For those of you who don't know Ron, he has a style, right? So I don't think I've ever seen Ron outside of black on black on black. Can you talk to us about your inspiration there? I totally, and he walked out today and he has a black car also, which was no surprise.
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess you kind of fall into this maybe somewhere along the way. I just found personally, maybe it's decision fatigue I'm trying to avoid. It's easy to stay with one thought. It might seem commonplace, but it really, the color black is very versatile. So I find it to be something that is just easy to wear. In fact, I started wearing it mainly because I sort of like the background nature of it. In fact, there's a little Johnny Cash in there, I suppose, too. But I know Frank Welch, a great architect, Dallas architect, Texas modernist, unfortunately passed away a handful of years ago. But he did, I think, he referred to me as Black Bart. So I took that as a compliment from Frank. But I think what's funny about clothing is, we do want to represent ourselves a certain way. And I almost think there's been a sort of almost backlash of designers wearing black, it seems, these days. And I've heard some commentary. I'm someone who kind of doubles down on that then. So
it works for you.
Do you own any clothing that aren't black?
Well, he did say he went to an all-white party and had to go shopping.
Oh,
yeah,
that
was a tough one. I never felt comfortable. I'm still not quite the same.
So, Ron, I'm intrigued to learn what you actually enjoy eating.
It's not always about the food. I just enjoy the environment. That's really where I really like what I eat and how I eat. I mean, locally, I probably credit this to my younger son, but Nobu has been a big favorite in terms of if we really want to go out for just a really great meal. But my experiences have mostly the ones that are memorable have been driven by places, and experiences. I recall a restaurant in Istanbul, for example. That's the one that always comes to mind. We sort of meandered through the streets, and there was a clearing. It was almost like just this open space that was probably part ruin. And we just sat down. It was, very vibrant, and it was just the atmosphere. You could smell the air.
Ron, did you ever watch Anthony Bourdain's
Absolutely,
show?
yeah.
I can see that you would love Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's why it's hard to say what a favorite place is, because it's really about the place it takes you. Where does food take you? We used to do a lot of work in China, and I would have the local team members there take me to all these exotic places, and that was, again, eye-opening for the kinds of food you eat.
I'm like you. When I go to a different city outside of Dallas, I want to go to the most local place that's in that city.
That's right.
And I don't want to go to a Morton's Steakhouse or a place that is sort of a chain that you can get back in Dallas or anywhere else for that matter. I want the best dive or diner, and I'll often go on to the website of Guy Fieri's website and check out what locations he's been to in that city just to see what it's like. And it's usually those are the places that are packed, that are hard to get into. But
that's right. Yeah, call ahead. But yeah, that's how I feel. It's like the food itself. I like all food types, but it really is
the environment.
The environment, yeah.
I'm with you on the environment. Well, great. Well, Ron, we appreciate your time today. I always just like talking to Ron and hear his passion and just knowledge of architecture.
Ron, you use the side of the brain that I kind of lack.
Yes.
It's the far right side. But when we say right side, you're on the bleeding edge of the right side. And so it's really interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, it's meant to be a compliment.
Because the reality is, I think that's what we're always striving for. How do you reconcile the left and right? Everything. We're always trying to, I see the world as, we're always confronted with a series of dichotomies. I talk a lot about Dallas and how it's got so much, scarcity and abundance. There's always a wide range. And, we've used the phrase that design can overcome disparity. So how do you always reconcile that? So the point about the brain and left and right, same thing. How do you take the science of design and still ensure that it's artful? And that's the bottom line. I would like to think that everyone who has a memorable place they've visited or where they work or where they live, it's the qualities of the space. It's not really the technical aspects. Those could bring delight, but the technical is usually in the service of the experiential. And that's the hard part. And that's intangible. Yeah. It's not a math problem. Mm-hmm. It's really subjective.
Well, again, just the way you explain that is
he wrapped
so
it up
well thought.
so perfectly for us. We didn't have to do anything.
I couldn't even fake understanding what you just said because it's so well thought. No, thank you again for your time today.
Yes,
we really
thank
appreciate
you.
the opportunity to visit with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. We've had a great run with really high concept projects with all of you. And
yes, y'all have been a great partner.
It's more to come, and I see this as again being open territory where we can start to make the mark. If I'll just close with one more piece is, Dallas has always, it's kind of in the middle, and yes, it has convenience and proximity to all things, but we like to just change that's the wording and just say it's actually the center. And can we make this more of a center? We're starting to really see that even in our own practice. We're the largest of all offices globally of Perkins Will. We're doing some of the most leading edge diverse work out there, and so that's a testament to the community of Dallas, not to just us as Perkins Will. So we appreciate the partnerships, and we've enjoyed getting to know as many people down here and working together as possible.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you so much. Well, guys, thank you for tuning in to Credible Talk. We will catch you on the next one.